If you've ever been bored in class, go like this. Now don't do that again during the rest of my presentation. But don't worry, you're not alone. According to a 2006 study, over 75% of high school students are bored. And that, my friends, is a problem. Because by the time we graduate from high school, we have spent on average over 16,000 hours in the classroom. Yet, educational research and policy often overlooks the classroom setting. Let's assume that this is not the setting we want. Let's assume that we want students who are happier, more engaged, and more connected to both the material and the community in which they live. With these goals in mind, I will argue three things. 1, classrooms disengage students because they obscure the usefulness of the material being learned. Our ray of hope lies in situated learning, which places learning in a meaningful context and increases student engagement. I will provide research to support these two claims, and then based on that research, I will take it and say that we need to dramatically change the infrastructure and our concept of the classroom, taking situated learning to an extreme. So we will begin by looking at the pitfalls of classrooms. In a study carried out by researchers at the University of Iowa, they found that as students progress through school, they describe their classes as decreasingly interesting and decreasingly useful. While depressing, these results are not altogether surprising. We're all used to the classroom setting, but if you step back and think about it, spending day after day in the same enclosed space for 6 hours isn't necessarily conducive to fostering interest. Classrooms are fundamentally removed from society activities, economic transactions, local issues, environment. And because the classrooms are removed in this way, students will sometimes learn skills that are applicable to the classroom setting, but not applicable to real-world contexts. I'll give you an example. When students learn vocabulary in the classroom, they look up the words in the dictionary, but they don't always get the context of the words because they're doing this classroom task of looking things up in the dictionary. So they mislearn the words sometimes. Researchers concluded that if students were merely to focus on learning vocabulary through natural conversation and reading, they would learn 10 times as many words per year, and they would be able to use them in more appropriate contexts. So in this case, the classroom task was ineffective at applying to real-world context. Classrooms can also make students sad. A 2009 study in Queensland compared student attitudes toward science classes learned inside the classroom and learned outside the classroom. And guess what? Positive emotions were associated with the learning that took place in the ecosystems that were being discussed, and negative emotions were associated with the lessons learned inside the classroom. Furthermore, students were better able to retain the information that they learned in the situated setting, outside in the ecosystems being discussed. So, this is the research that points to classrooms. And it's a pretty bland picture. We have negative emotions, decrease in interest, a decreased sense of the usefulness of class being taught. So, based on this research, I do conclude that classrooms disengage students because they obscure the usefulness of the material. I think it's time for a ray of hope. Situated learning, which places learning in a meaningful context and increases student engagement. Situated learning can be applied in 3 different ways, and I will take you through all 3 different strategies. First, we can situate learning in a local context. For instance, there was a highly unpopular chemistry course at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. And then teachers decided that they would just overhaul the whole curriculum and instead center it around local issues and tie in indigenous people's perspectives on the science being taught. And what do you know, the student feedback shot up and the class became highly popular. So situating the learning in a local issue helps increase student engagement. A second way to situate learning is to place it in real-world contexts. In a second grade classroom, a teacher helped her students set up a grocery store at the back of the classroom. Items were marked as they would be in a grocery store. Students had to think about sales tax and estimate how much they could buy each week given their allowance. Not only were students excited to engage in this math unit, but they were also able to see the direct applicability of the math that they were studying. One student said, "I think it shows you what it would be like when you grow up and how to spend your money." So these kids were right there in the classroom seeing how their learning could be applied in the real world. The third way to situate learning is to get outside the classroom so that students can see and connect with the material that they are studying. At a South Carolina elementary school, students spent an entire science unit learning about sweetgrass. They went to their local wetland to study the grass's role in the ecosystem, and they talked to local basket weavers about how they use the grass in their daily lives. Teachers noticed an increase in student engagement. Students were asking more questions than they had in the previous science unit, and students were paying more attention and performed better academically in the subsequent science unit, suggesting that situated learning can pique interest and engagement in the topics that students are studying. So these are the three ways to situate learning. And indeed, a study from 2003 shows that after students participate in a situated learning course, their perception of the usefulness of the topic they are studying increases. But situated learning doesn't only help connect students to the material. It also helps them connect to the communities and societies in which they live. In interviews conducted with high school seniors from across the country, over 70% brought up altruism as something they learn outside of the classroom, and 84% brought up social competence. Altruism and social competence as topics that we learn outside the classroom. So these significant majorities indicate that learning beyond the classroom walls can help people learn what it means to be a conscientious citizen. And again, it's not surprising that we learn what it means to be a good member of society when we're actually out in that society, rather than in a removed classroom. So let's take all of this research that I've given you so far. So we have the traditional learning classrooms, which decrease interest, take things out of context, decrease the sense of usefulness, and make kids sad. And then compare that with the situated learning, which indicates that kids can be happy, more engaged, more connected to their communities, and see things as more useful. With all this research in mind, I say, let's break down these walls. And that brings me to my third point, which is that we should change the structure and concept of what a classroom is. Situated learning has long piddled around in field trips and short-term programs, weak attempts. I propose we change this. Let's take this research and run with it, and dramatically change the infrastructure and concept of the classroom so that students can connect with the material and the communities in which they live. If we are to truly benefit from all of the benefits of situated learning, we need to integrate classrooms into the community so that students can connect with it and see the applicability of their studies. So what does this look like? It simply means holding class where the learning matters. So an office at a bank might morph into a situated classroom. Desks and calculators might open up into the grocery store. A doctor's office might be filled with student microscopes, and ecology lectures can be held in the forest. The learning material should fit naturally with the setting. Now, this concept can't be implemented overnight, and a lot of changes would have to be made, including smaller class sizes, viable transportation, and cooperation with local organizations. It would be costly, but consider this. If we have students who are more engaged and more dedicated to learning, then perhaps in the long run, our society will see long-term savings. I hope I've encouraged you to consider the effects that setting has upon learning, shown you some of the pitfalls of classroom learning and the potential of situated learning. This is not a proposal that can happen overnight, but let me leave you with this. If we hold as an ideal creating students who are engaged both as learners and as members of the community, then we should consider this progressive sense of situated learning as a goal to strive toward and resituate our concept of the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Yari.